Welcome to the Fuck Therapy Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about trauma bonds. I really want to empower you, to provide you with information, to potentially give you some data, some reference points, so you can see it differently. The whole idea of talking about this subject is, of course, to create awareness, to give you clarity and understanding, but ultimately, I want to provide you with some new tools to set yourself free. To set yourself free from this horrible thing. Now, I want to dispel a myth right from the get-go. One of the things that when I'm talking to anyone that is grappling with a trauma bond is that they feel stupid, they feel foolish. They're like, how did this ever happen to me? How did I go from there to here? I must be stupid. And here's the kicker. I work with women in 33 countries around the world, and I work with some of the most intelligent women, from senior business positions, government officials, to beautiful house mothers and all these type of people, very, very intelligent women. And they have many of them have suffered a form of trauma bond, and it has nothing to do with intellect. Relationships, the way we respond to relationships, self-worth, self-trust, self-respect, how we manage boundaries, our reference points to how we navigate relationships has nothing to do with intellect. And it has everything to do with how we're going to respond to manipulation, to coercion, to abuse, to these circumstances from pretty shitty people that cause this trauma bond. Now, a trauma bond is actually a form of addiction, and we're going to dig into that later on, and I think it's the best way to view it. But how does it happen? How does it creep up on you like that? The analogy I often use is the analogy of, imagine grabbing, and bear with me as we go through this analogy. So just hang on for about 30 seconds and it will start making sense. So I want in your mind for you to imagine yourself grabbing a brand new roll of toilet paper. And I want you to look at the toilet paper as if you're looking through the cardboard hole and you're looking at the paper at that angle. And you're just studying it for a few minutes. And then if I was just to take that off you, hold it for a day and return it back to you. But when I returned it back to you, I had removed one sheet of paper. I returned it back neat to you. Could you tell that one sheet had been taken? I would suggest that you couldn't tell that. Now, let's assume that first sheet that's stuck there was already gone, right? So it's the second sheet. You couldn't tell that it was gone. And then imagine you have a look at that toilet roll and, I take it for a couple of days, give it back to you, and one more sheet is gone. And then a month later, one more sheet is gone. And then 2 days later, one more sheet is gone. Over time, it would get smaller and smaller and smaller. But each time you wouldn't see it happening, each time you wouldn't recognize it. And if we pair the abuse that you've gone through, a manipulative situation, a time where you didn't represent yourself, a time where you felt too unsafe to speak your truth, each one of those represented a sheet of paper that disappeared over days, weeks, months, years. This is how it happens. It creeps up on you and you don't see it happening. But then there's a whole lot of chemical responses going on in the background. There's a whole lot of grooming and a whole lot of programming that we're going to dig into as we work through this program that is actually causing this addiction to the abuser. The addiction for their affirmation, an addiction for their approval, the addiction because you doubt yourself so much through the gaslighting that you have to go back to them to clarify anything. We're going to dig into this. And the ultimate goal of this podcast, of this discussion that we're going to have today, is to empower you, but to set you free. So hang in there. We've got some deep stuff to go through. Let's get into it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'd like to ask you a few questions. These are a few questions for those that are going, I'm not sure if I'm trauma bonded or not. And for those that perhaps are, this may confirm it for you. So the first question is around compulsive connection. And the question that I ask here is, do you feel an irresistible urge to maintain an emotional bond with your ex-partner, with your partner, with your abuser, even though you recognize the harm it's causing you? I think that's a really important question. The second question is around persistent engagement. In other words, despite wanting to stop or reduce contact with them, do you find yourself continually engaging with them regardless of the negative consequences? The third question, it's around intense cravings and connection. Do you experience a strong longing and yearning for emotional closeness and approval from your abusive person? The fourth question is around denial and harmful dynamics. And the question is, have you ever downplayed or denied the harmful effects of your relationship with your abuser, focusing instead on the positive moments? I think we've all been guilty of that. We are so invested in the end result. We're so invested in the relationship working that we downplay the seriousness of the abuse because it's the only way we can rationalize it to get the outcome of the relationship lasting versus representing our needs, our wants, and our desires. These are all signs of a trauma bond. And the fifth question is around tolerance and withdrawal. Do you find yourself needing more interaction with your abuser to feel satisfied? So if you've answered yes to these questions, then there is a high probability that you are grappling with a trauma bond. So with that being said, my heart goes out to you. I also want to reassure you and to say that you're okay and that there is a solution on how to move through this. So please don't lose hope just because we've landed on perhaps, this is not a diagnosis, but that perhaps, you are grappling with the trauma bond, and recognize it's just a heading. It's a heading saying that I've suffered abuse and I've got this connection that I'm grappling to break. I've got this addiction, but here's the reality. There's always a methodology on how to break addiction. And although you may not know it, I can walk you through that process. So I don't want to leave you feeling a level of hopelessness because this is just the beginning of your journey. The fact that you are listening to this, the fact that you are opening your heart, the fact that you are learning these new things is a step towards your healing journey, a step towards setting yourself free. And that is what's important. So as I said before, trauma bond. The best way to think of a trauma bond, the simplest way to think of a trauma bond, without getting too complex, is to say that it's an addiction. Under MRI scans, the brain responds almost identically to the love bombing effects within a trauma bonded relationship as it does as if you were to take a hit of cocaine. They are almost identical. We're going to dig into this in a little bit more detail, but even under MRI, these aren't just analogies. These are actually chemical, hormonal reactions within us that is identical to this. So recognize it's got nothing to do with intellect. We have so many addicted people in this world, and it's not because they're dumb. It's because they're addicted. And typically the addiction isn't necessarily an addiction to a substance as much as it is, in its foundational roots, as a solution to overcome another problem. In other words, quite often, those that are addicted to substances grapple with dealing with life, grappling to deal with circumstance, and therefore they turn to something else to try and find relief or happiness or any of those sorts of things. Same in a relationship. The pain that you are going through the manipulation and coercion and abuse with your partner is too much for you to handle. Your cortisol levels are too high. You need to reduce them. So you reduce their actions. You hunt for their affirmation. They give you their affirmation. Dopamine is released and oxytocin is released. Dopamine is the reward hormone. We all know it's addictive and it's in anticipation of reward. The oxytocin, this is released in a mother when she gives birth to a child. It's the love hormone. It's the connection hormone. So the fact that this happens to your abuser, we get addicted and it furthers the bond through the oxytocin. And the cycle just continues. It starts with little things and ends with big things. So this is just the beginning of the journey. So let's explore this. So one of the beautiful things about relationship is emotional connection. Emotional connection is a deep bond or attachment based on shared feelings, experiences, and understanding. Now, that is absolutely beautiful. It's the feeling of empathy, trust, vulnerability, effective communication, and here's a kicker, mutual respect. It's fostering intimacy, which is so beautiful. It's support and it's a sense of belonging. All of these things are based around emotional connection, and they are foundational core components of relationship. But what happens in an abusive relationship is what starts through the love bombing and develops the emotional connection, it transfers to emotional dependence, which is significantly different to emotional connection. It sits in the same space, but instead of it coming from free will, it comes from this addiction, this dependence, this attachment. It's reliance on another person for emotional validation, support, and fulfillment. Reliance upon another person. It's feelings of insecurity versus empowerment. It's fear of abandonment, which creates low self-esteem. It's an inability to regulate emotions without the presence and approval of the very person that is dragging you down. And where in emotional connection, one of the beautiful things is balance, there's imbalance in emotional dependence. The balance of power goes to the abuser. They exert control over your emotions and behaviors. And as a consequence of all of these things, they exploit your emotional dependence to maintain control and manipulate you so it continues over and over and over again. So these are the things that we've got to look out for. These are the questions we've got to ask. Am I emotionally connected or am I emotionally dependent? If I've slipped into dependence, okay, how do we reverse engineer this? And I'm going to give you some answers around that. So in the short term, because I want to give people bite-sized pieces, because sometimes we're listening to podcasts in the car, on the train, and we're getting snapshots and we're not getting it all. And I don't want to leave you hanging with some of these things. So let me just give you throw you a bone here to say, how do we remove emotional dependence? Well, we build self-worth. Now, one of the things these days is these major headings like self-worth have been so used and abused that they lose their meaning. But understand, behind every major heading, there are powerful nuances. There are gold nuggets that sit behind self-worth. Self-worth isn't what you think about yourself. Self-worth comes out in action. Self-worth will sit with emotional connection and won't allow emotional dependence. If we have emotional dependence, we can see a breakdown in self-worth. The nuances behind it is how we rebuild self-worth. So we have to understand what is the foundation of self-worth. The foundation of self-worth is self-trust. You see, if we were to go out on a date and someone was to be rude to you right in front of me and I did nothing, if someone was to abuse you, manipulate you, coerce you in front of me and I did nothing, how would you look at me? You'd look at me pretty poorly. Now, what if this happened time and time again? You see, very quickly, you would lose trust in me. Why? Because I didn't represent you when I should have. And you would lose respect in me. And as a consequence of that loss in respect, very quickly, you would see no value in me. And rightly so, I should have my ass whooped. But now let's remove me and let's bring it back to you. You see, this is what your abuser grooms you to do. They groom you not to represent yourself. They educate you that if you do represent yourself, there's going to be a negative consequence. So they put you in a place where you don't. As a consequence of not representing yourself, you lose trust in you. When you lose trust in you, you lose respect in you. When you lose respect in you, you don't see your value. Hence why you say, I've lost my worth. I've lost me. You see, simply by not representing yourself, it's a disconnect of self. It's a disconnect of your relationship with self. The abuser trains you to become your number one abuser. So they're doing it and you're doing it. But you're going to always beat yourself up more than them. So we become reliant upon them. Can you see the cycle? We can absolutely reverse all of this, but let's continue. So how does emotional connection turn to emotional dependence? Well, there's a whole host of things that will trigger this. One is that it's going to be done subtly, because in the early stages of relationship, it's love bombing, right? They're going to love bomb you. They're going to mimic the words, actions, and behaviors of love to allure you, to attract you, to bring you in to their web. Now, this isn't evil genius. This is just how they've learned to live. This is survival mechanism of an insecure person. Regardless of how they may appear, it is all driven from insecurity. But they love bomb you. They make you feel incredible. And the reality is, what they're seeing in you is your character. They see that you're a truthful person, a loving person, a caring person, an empathetic person, a loyal person, a funny person, a humorous person, a courageous person. They see all these beautiful things and they're attracted to that. The problem is they're insecure people. Well, and insecure people very quickly start becoming insecure about how incredible you are. Hence, why they start breaking you down, while they start manipulating you, while they start gaslighting you, while they start destroying you. This is what they do, because they're actually the thing they fell in love with in the first place becomes their kryptonite. You see, your worth never changes form. The only thing that happens is that you start seeing less and less and less of it. You see, it's always there. Just like the moon. Sometimes we see the whole moon. Sometimes we see a little part, half a moon, a quarter moon. Sometimes we don't see the moon. Not that I'm an astrophysicist or anything, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't change shape or size or form. It is always the same. It's just that we can't see it. The art of the manipulator, the abuser, the narcissist that you're trauma bonded to is to prevent you from seeing your worth, making you believe that it has disappeared, that it no longer exists, or perhaps it never existed. But this is all manipulation and coercion. This is all the things that cause the trauma bond. These are all the things, the gaslighting, the isolation, the projection, the silent treatment, the threats and intimidation, the invalidation, the manipulation, the triangulation. These are all tools to break you down, to doubt yourself, to become reliant upon them, to not represent yourself, to become groomed, to become prepared for use and service. You see how it's all forming shape? And I know it all sounds horrific, and it is horrific, and it is disgusting, but these are the things that you're grappling with. And here's the kicker. You weren't ready for this. None of us were ready for this. I've suffered from this. There was a time I was absolutely unaware of any of these things. I had this false belief system that if I was all of these wonderful things, and if I did all of these wonderful things, that I would just simply be loved. I would find a partner and I would be able to give and I would be loved. And I lived in that Mary Poppins world for a very short amount of time and became educated to reality that that's just not the case. Not that I knew it at the time. This is something I've learned many decades afterwards. So please don't feel bad there. But it's that exposure to that abuse, to that manipulation, to narcissism, to sociopathic behavior, to lies, deceit, cheating, to experience all those emotions, to truly understand it. You know, I never sit myself above anyone. I look at it and say, you know, why am I able to sit in this chair now and talk to you? Because I've been there. I've been in the situation you're in. I've been that person trauma bonded. I've made all the excuses for my partner that you've made. I was the one that felt like a fool, but I couldn't do anything. I felt hopeless around it. And I recognize and I feel your pain. But today, we're going to start breaking free from all of this. I did it. You can do it. 100%. And here's the kicker. Since I did it, I've actually refined how to do it. So there's even better news there. So let's continue. Now, I'm not going to go into this into huge detail. I actually have a program on this. I'm not going to try and sell it to you or talk to you about that. But effectively, what I do is I go through a whole host of manipulation tactics. And I talk to you about 4 key components of the effect that the manipulation tactics or the abuse tactics the effects they have on you in 4 key areas. The 4 key areas are: how does a manipulation tactic, for argument's sake, love bombing, to mimic the words, actions, and behaviors of love, how does love bombing affect you in this situation to end up trauma bonded as one piece of the puzzle? Well, it affects your core beliefs. It affects your core beliefs, and you become dependent on your abuser for self-worth. They now have the key to self-worth. So core beliefs is the key thing. Our whole world is going to run off the core beliefs that we have in our subconscious. It then affects our security and our trust. And we become uncertain in relation to us and who we are and what makes us us and what makes us valuable. The coping mechanism is to seek approval and validation from the very person causing the abuse. Then it's about repetition and reoccurrence. Because I am now becoming dependent on that person, I have a belief system that they actually hold the key to my self-worth. I feel insecurity within myself, and my coping mechanism is to seek approval from them. The emotional highs and lows I go through, I'm always going to refer back to them for clarity, for understanding, for them to place it, for them to tell me what is and isn't, for tell me what's right and what isn't. End of the day, I know I'm always going to be wrong, right? And we go through those 4 key beliefs. If we looked at gaslighting, the core belief is that you can't trust you, that you can't trust your thoughts, your memories, that you've become all of a sudden irresponsible with these sorts of things. It erodes the trust we have in our own judgment. That's how it affects our safety and trust. Our coping mechanism, again, becomes reliance on the abuser for validation and reality checking. Imagine living with a narcissist and referring to someone that doesn't deal in reality and truth and only has the narcissistic perception, in other words, delusion, yet we rely on them for clarity. We rely on them for validation and for reality checking. It's horrific. What's the repetition? Continued confusion and self-doubt. So if I continually self-doubt myself, I have to seek approval from them. Can you see how the addiction is formed? Can you see how now these manipulation tactics constantly affect us? If we looked at silent treatment, what is the core belief? It's fear of abandonment. It will trigger anyone that has any level of abandonment issues, which a lot of us do have, and rejection. We're terrified of rejection. So our core beliefs are that we are going to be abandoned and rejected. So that alters our whole behavioral pattern. We feel insecure in the relationship. We become compliant and avoid silent treatment with everything that we have. So in other words, we will sell our own soul in order not to do this. We'll apologize for things that we should never apologize for. We will accept poor behavior. We will go out of our way to eliminate that because we're so terrified of that abandonment and rejection. And the repetition is we're going to have anticipation of punishment. We recognize where it's going. So I'm not going to go through all of these. This is just a little example, but I want you to start thinking of all the different things that you've gone through. How does it affect your core beliefs, your safety and trust? What coping mechanisms have we put in place to deal with that? Are these coping mechanisms serving us, or are they working against us? And I will almost guarantee you they're working against you. And what is happening in cycle, in repetition, in reoccurrence? So it's your core beliefs, your safety and your trust, your coping mechanism, and the repetition. There's a lot in that. And for anyone that wants further clarification, please reach out to me. Happy to have those discussions. So let's have a look at the effects of psychological abuse. So if we take this back a level, the way in which our core beliefs impacted, the way in which they're created, is through repetition and dramatic emotional impact. In other words, traumatic events. Repetition, something that happens over and over and over and over again. So if you are told something over and over again, you're useless, you're silly, you're dumb, you're all these negative things that these abusive people say, and it's told to you over and over and over again, it starts forming a belief system. Naturally, it becomes a traumatic event when that happened over and over again because of the cortisol response. But it could also be other types of abuse that come in that affect those trauma responses. It could be a significant abusive event that would make you feel worthless, that would make you feel devalued. And this is what causes belief systems. And this is what the abusers are putting us through. Now, some of the common belief systems, and there's many, but I'm just putting some big headings out there, some of the common belief systems that are formed through this abusive behavior is that we end up with a belief in our abuser's benevolence. We rationalize their behavior, distorting it as love and protection. Remember the coping mechanism? We, through gaslighting, believe that it is always our fault. Now, there's something in our intuition that we know it's not our fault, so it never actually aligns. But what we do is take accountability and responsibility for it. And if we respond to the abuse, to the hurt, we take accountability and responsibility for that also. If we step into reactive abuse, for those that don't know what reactive abuse is if you imagine that I poke you in the chest, just with my finger, and I tap you in the chest, and you say, Jamie, don't do that, please. And I do it again. And you go, Jamie, please don't do that. And I do it again. And you go, Jamie, I've asked you twice. This is the third time. That really hurts. Uncomfortable. I really feel, I do it again. And eventually you slap my hand away and go, stop it. I mean, heaven forbid that you may actually even swear at me for doing it. You then get attacked for your reaction. You get told to, see, you're the psycho. You're the abusive person. Look what you've done. But you being a beautiful person, you being a person that recognized that, okay, that perhaps wasn't dealt with as eloquently as it could be. Maybe I am. Maybe it is me. Maybe I am a psycho. Maybe, and you actually take on that accountability and responsibility also. And we need to stop doing that. Another belief system is that you're stuck. You feel powerless to change the circumstance, and leaving is just an impossibility. You've bought into the narrative for a whole host of reasons that sound, absolutely palatable and acceptable as to why you can't leave. Whether it's the children, whether it's housing, whether it's money, whether it's all of those sorts of things, when the reality is there's always a solution. But we buy into that narrative. We also form a belief system that we have to stay to survive, because there's a dependence on the abuser for survival, fearing abandonment or harm if you attempt to leave. I often talk about this situation and say, if this is you, particularly if you are in fear of physical or sexual abuse, please reach out with whatever you do and let us help create a strategy that is specifically customized for that situation. Those physical situations are different to intellectual and emotional abuse. So we just have to handle it differently. It's not about one being worse than the other. And in fact, anyone that suffers from physical abuse will all say that they would rather that than the emotional abuse any day of the week. Either is horrific. None of it is acceptable. And I want to set you free from all of it. And the other thing is that their belief that the abuse is actually normal. They rationalize that this is actually normal and acceptable behavior when it's not. So these are just a couple of random core belief systems that get formed when we are in these abusive relationships, and we have to break that cycle. It is so critical that we break that cycle, because here's the reality. Your core belief system is actually going to impact your perception. So your guiding principle will impact your perception. Your perception is how you filter information. If you imagine that I had glasses on, right, which I actually do, but they had a red lens, everything that I looked at would be filtered through red lenses. So everything would have a red tinge. That would be my perception. But the reality is it's just my lens. That's a very good way of explaining how a core belief system is going to get filtered as your perception. Your perspective is the story that you tell yourself, and your perspective comes from your perception. And then you move into your prospective with how things are going to play out in the future, which will enforce your belief system. Now, I know that's a little bit complicated, so please let me break it down and see if we can simplify it. Let's assume you had a core belief system, and that core belief system said that to be loved, I must be everything and give everything. I've got to have this checkbox of all these things that I must be and that I must do in order to be loved. You would then have a perception that if you were doing all those things and you were all these things and you were being abused, manipulated, coerced, and told that these weren't good enough, that you would be failing. That would be your perception. Your perspective would then be, and it would slip into your coping mechanism, that you're failing because you're not good enough, because you're not worth it. And it would move into your perspective that you are worthless, which will form your belief system that you have to be all these things and do all these things. And around it would go. So we have to break the cycle. We have to recognize that that belief system doesn't work. You see, it sounds so logical that if you are loving, compassionate, empathetic, caring, resilient, beautiful, sexy, a good lover, a good cook, a good mother, a good provider, then of course, if I am all of those things, I would be loved. But here's the kicker. What if you're in a relationship with someone that's insecure and you are all those things and they see that you're all those things and they can't handle that because you are all of those things constantly and they can't keep that pace because they are not those things. They don't have that character. And the only coping mechanism they've learned is how to drag you down, how to abuse you, how to hurt you, you see, it's got nothing to do with you, yet you see it has everything to do with you. You end up with a belief system that it's me and it's not you, it's them. You see, I look and say, let's just play a game for a minute and let's just assume I see this in you. But for you, let's assume that you are a high value woman. You have the highest worth. Let's just assume that just for a minute. Let's just play this one out. Then all you're really asking as a high value woman is that you have a partner that is truthful, that is trustworthy, that is somewhat compassionate and empathetic, as good as a man could possibly be, right? Nothing out of the ordinary, that he's respectful, that he actually makes you feel safe and supported and accomplished and valued. He makes you feel free. He makes you feel like he's queen. He makes you feel wanted. He makes you feel desirable. He respects you. He represents you. Simple things, 101 things. You're not asking too much. But if he is unable to step to that plate, you develop an assumption that you're not worth these things. It's not that you're not worth them. It's that these people have an inability to give them. Significant difference. You see, a high-value woman is hard work to a low-value man. Let me say that again. A high-value woman is hard work to a low-value man. And so it should be. But to a high-value man, it's effortless. So we've got to shift the narrative about it being you and recognize that it was them. We need to recognize the flow-on effect through our life that a belief system has. So when we go deeper than what we've just gone there, we have a look at it and we say, the core belief system, what does a core belief system do? If I believe I'm not worthy, if I have accepted that maybe I'm not good enough, if I've accepted that I've had a couple of kids and I've, got a couple of stretch marks and, I don't look like I'm 21 anymore and I'm now 30, 40, 50 years old and I'm actually worth less, then what thoughts am I going to have? What thoughts are going to run through my mind if I genuinely are believing that? They're going to be thoughts that represent someone of a lower value. So in other words, if I was to meet someone, I would probably try a bit harder because I would think that I would need to in order to make it work because my value is a little bit less versus than setting the bar really high and making him pole vault to get to you. So a core belief system will actually fuel your thoughts. Your thoughts are going to influence the choices you make. So what choices am I going to make as a consequence of these thoughts of me not being valuable? Well, that's going to then impact your behaviors. It will impact what you do. It's a natural consequence. Now, based on how you act, what you do, let me give you an example. You don't say no when you should have said no. You don't speak your truth when they've really stepped out of line just to keep the peace. Well, that action is going to realize your life experience. It's the reality of what happens. If I go to the gym every day and if I eat in a calorie deficit every day and if I do all the right things and sleep right and so forth, well, the result is going to be a consequence of that. If I eat chocolate and eat that and eat in a calorie surplus and don't train and do, well, my lived experience is going to be something very different. So your behaviors directly impact and reflect your lived experience. Now remember, this all stems from your belief system. I believe I'm not worthy. I have thoughts of unworthiness. They impact my choices and are reflected in my behavior, and they realize my experience. They then trigger my emotions and create the feelings that I live with. I get to the end of that cycle and it affirms my belief system that I'm unworthy, which makes sense because the core belief system was that I'm not worthy. I bought into this false narrative that came from an abusive person. I bought into this false narrative from an abusive person that couldn't get to my level, so they dragged me down. And it's now becoming my reality, but it's not real. That's the point of all of this. It is not real. Just like the moon, your worth hasn't changed. It's just that you can no longer see it. So it is time that we flip the narrative. It is time that we reconnect you to you. Now, the key steps that we've got to go through to create shift, to set yourself free, is to first put our hands up and accept, wow, this is where I'm at. To seek clarity and to recognize that shit, I have been abused. It's the oscillation of emotion, the disorientation, the gaslighting, the love bombing that has created this addiction to a really horrible, shitty person, someone that is bringing no value to my life and only harm. And although I still have this desire and this connection, I know I have to break it. No different to that if it was a substance. If there was a substance addiction and we decided that's it, enough's enough, well, we need to go no contact as much as we possibly can. Now, no contact is different for everyone. So no contact when there's no kids involved, no real estate involved, no business involved is very, very, when I say simple, it's simple in practice. Doing it is a little bit different, but the solution is simple. You know, when you have children, when you have real estate, when you have businesses, when you have a whole host of those things, okay, it becomes more complex. No contact isn't necessarily no contact, but it's limited contact. And we can work through that. And I can help you navigate that space. But we're going to go as no contact as possible. Why? Because when we're in our healing process, you know, an alcoholic's not going to go and sit in the pub and go, this is a really good place for me to heal. They're not going to walk to another area but then bring a bottle into that area and go, this is a good idea to heal. So just see it like that. And it's about accepting it, and it's about recognizing that this is going to be really tough. Addiction is one of the hardest things to let go of because the focus is, how do I get rid of this? How do I stop smoking? How do I stop smoking? Well, if all you think is, how do I stop smoking? The only triggered reaction is, I want to smoke, I want to smoke. If it's, how do I get rid of this person? How do I get rid of this person? All you're going to do is want them more. So that's not what we do. We now focus on you. We focus on you. This is your time. This is your time for healing. This is your time to actually get back into relationship with you. And I promise you, the more you focus on you, it will deal with itself. The addiction will break as a consequence of you focusing on you. You rebuilding your self-trust. You putting some actions in place to rebuild self-trust, to reconnect to self-worth, to then move into an area where you start understanding and answering one of the smallest questions in the world. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I when you remove relationships and children and work and titles and sporting and hobbies, and I remove all that because they're just things we do. Who am I at the center core of my consciousness? We need to answer that question, because when you know who you are, when you can anchor it to reference points from your past, when you can shift your perspectives on what you've gone through in the past to recognize your qualities, your worth, and how incredible that you are, life starts changing. You then have to recognize, what is one of the things that I didn't do that got me to here? And that's going to be, I didn't recognize the red flags, or I recognized them, or some of them, but I didn't do anything about it. I didn't manage my boundaries. Okay, so we need to learn a new system on how to manage our boundaries. Hence why we need self-worth first, because boundary management is about self-worth. If you don't have self-worth, you won't represent yourself. If you don't know who you truly are, you won't know who you're representing. So self-worth has to come first. I need to know that I'm worthy of love and belonging. I need to know that I'm worthy of respect and validation, and to be heard and to be listened to and to be a valued member of whatever this is. I then need to tune into my intuition. Through the abuse, the manipulation, the coercion, the grooming, my intuition's probably got tuned to guilt and shame. And I need to break that cycle, because every time I go to represent myself, I feel terrible. I've got to reattune my intuition, which is there to protect your self-worth. And I've got to start listening to it. I've got to start tuning into it. I've got to recognize, hang on a minute, does this serve me or does this not serve me? And then speak my truth, which moves into that third point of developing integrity. Now, it's not integrity for the rest of the world, because I think you have a level of mastery in that. It's having integrity for you. It's representing you like you would a loved one. These are the key elements. These are the key steps to boundary management. Once we're there, we've got new skills. We've rebuilt our self-trust, our self-respect, and our self-worth. We know who we are. We can identify red flags. We can manage our boundaries. We learn to speak our truth. We speak our truth with peaceful confidence. We don't need to raise our voice. We don't need to repeat ourselves. We can say things once, it's done, it's out there, and it just is. Now get a pen and paper. Get ready to write this sentence down, because this will change your world. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Well, I hope you've got that pen and paper. Write this sentence down word for word. The whole sentence, an entire sentence. No. No is an entire sentence. You have the right to say it. You have the right to say it. So we need to learn to say it. And while we're learning to say no, we need to throw in the bin 2 words. I'm sorry. Let's throw them in the bin. So we're going to learn to say no. We can say no, thank you. Makes it a little bit more polite. We can say fuck no and be a bit more assertive. But no is a complete sentence. We don't need to explain ourselves. Just because an abuser is demanding explanation doesn't mean it's required. The answer can be no. The entire sentence can be no, and we can leave it at that. Then it's about detaching from everything that doesn't serve you, the belief systems that don't serve you. We need to let go of them. The stories that you tell yourself, we need to let go to. The fear, the guilt, the shame, we need to let go of it. Otherwise, you're living with like a backpack full of rocks of trauma, full of rocks of guilt and shame and stories that don't serve you. There's a significant difference between suppression, to push something down, and to actually formally let it go. And this is what we need to do. So once we've detached, we can then move into purpose to finally answer the question and drive our life forward. So this is the process. I want to give you absolute hope. So if you are trauma bonded, if you have suffered from abuse, if any of this resonates with you, if you would like to know more about it, please reach out to me. If there's an area to comment something, I don't care what it is, and we will reach out to you. Feel free to direct message me if you feel comfortable to do that. Email me. My website is jamieryder.com.au, whatever you need, or just absorb this, learn it, and start applying these things to your life. This is the moment where you get to make a decision, where you get to drive your life forward, and where you get to set yourself free. You are incredible. You are amazing. This is the Fuck Therapy Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. My name is Jamie Ryder. You're incredible. Stay strong.